Hello and welcome to another episode of Faith and Spirituality in a Time of Crisis. My name is Chris Fuller and I'm the Chief Sponsorship and Mission Integration Officer at St. Joseph's College of Maine. Early on in this series, I had a conversation with Martin Casella, a writer and playwright, about movies that inspire hope. More recently, we find ourselves in a surge of coronavirus cases that are keeping us at home once again, including during the holidays. So I thought it would be nice to return to a conversation with Martin about movies that inspire hope, but this time with a particular holiday theme. So please join me for this conversation with Martin Casella on movies that inspire hope, special Christmas edition. Okay, Marty, so I hosted you a few months ago as part of this series when we were in the midst of this pandemic crisis. And not long after that, going into late summer, fall, it seemed like things were beginning to subside, but now we find ourselves again in the midst of a wave of this virus. More people are staying at home. It's the holidays. Fewer people will be traveling. So I wanted to invite you back for a conversation about movies that inspire hope, but this time with a holiday theme.
Okay.
And when we talked about this, we talked about similar to what we talked about before, right? Which was not just holiday movies in general, but those that in some way get at the nature of what it means to be human, right? If you think of spirituality as being religious, but also beyond religion in terms of that which draws us into being more deeply human, that was kind of the underlying thread of the films that you and I discussed today. And to those who are watching, you can find any and all of these films either through your streaming services or rental on your streaming services, or in the case of one movie that we're going to talk about, the short film, you can even watch on YouTube. So let's start with the elephant in the room, which is It's a Wonderful Life.
Right.
We discussed it last time, but no conversation, I think, about Christmas movies, especially those that strike at what it means to be human, is complete without a discussion about this film.
Yeah.
So let's start there. In terms of now looking ahead to the holidays in this unusual circumstance, what is it about the film that you maybe find particularly meaningful this year?
Honestly, I'm going to go with my first impulse. My what do they say? My default answer always is, and I think we talked about it before. It's the scene in the cemetery when he finds out that his brother has died, and if you hadn't been there to save your brother wouldn't have saved other people. This year, I think the scene that gets to me the most is when he comes home on Christmas Eve and he knows the money is missing and he knows the bank examiner's coming, and one child is banging out that song on the piano, and somebody else is building something, and the other one is going, "These are my pedals I won at school," and his wife's like, "Yes, we have to do this, we have to be at somebody's house by 8 o'clock," and he finally just loses it. And there's that very powerful, it's that scene we've seen a million times in various versions, and there's a scene similar to that in a movie that I wrote recently, where he just tears everything up in the room and breaks things and breaks the tower that he'd been working on of, like, some foreign country that he wants to visit, and he just shouts at everybody and he yells at everybody, and that's that feels very that feels very real this year. That sense of, please shut the TV off, please stop talking, please, and I know you and I have talked about this privately and with some other friends, that whole sense of George is having his own little pandemic in his own little way, which is there's no way to escape this thing that's going on in his life, and that to me suddenly, watching it now, that feels so human. That sense of, will I ever do anything right? Will this ever end? Will this craziness, this noise, this frustration and disappointment, will it ever end? And that feels so human this year to me, and that the humanity now in that moment, and it's hard because we love George. George is great. George is upbeat and very positive and always looking forward to the future, and that's when he hits that moment where it's all terrible. everything, and nobody understands. And of course, the wonderful capper at the end of the scene is when she tells the kids, go upstairs and pray for daddy. Pray, me
Mhm.
too, mommy. Yes, all of you, pray as hard as you can for daddy.
Mhm.
And yeah, that I'm actually a little choked up describing that.
Well, and in that scene, when it's Jimmy Stewart at his best. That is, at
Hmm.
the end of that scene, when he looks at her and he just says, Mary, in
Yeah.
desperation.
Yes.
He's looking for an answer and he can't find an answer to the pain, right? To
Yeah.
the unending sense that this will never, there's no way out of this circumstance or this situation.
Yeah.
Another thing that Capra does so well is visual metaphor. And so, George Bailey, who wanted to be an engineer, going to go off to college and study engineering, tears down all the things he's built. Right,
Yeah.
they're standing there in that room, and this is a great
Yeah.
metaphor for
Yeah.
how he feels like his life is collapsing around him. For me, it's one of the we try to talk about if there are any graces in this experience. It's the way that many of us, via technology, have been able to reconnect with people in our lives, perhaps that we haven't been in
Mm.
connection with. And for me, it's the scene at the end of the movie when George's brother says to him, "My big brother George, the richest man in town," and that, of course, is a metaphor again, right? That George is
Yeah.
rich not because he has money, but because he has all these friends in his life. And there you have in that room, the panoply of all the characters you've seen in this film to kind of span the expanse of George's life. And for me, I think
Yeah.
that seems meaningful in a way of thinking about the way I've been able to reconnect with some people I literally haven't talked to, in some cases, in decades. Uh, and you and I know through some connections that we have, through things we're participating in, some reconnections we've made. And there's some that I've been able to make in other ways as well. I think for me, I mean, that's what makes a great film great, right? That you can watch it year after year after year, but certain scenes stand out perhaps more than others, given whatever the circumstances of that year might be.
This movie's very hard for me to talk about, especially this year. Um, the thing that George never sees is what he's done for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
every single person in that town.
Yeah.
What he's done for them, and that's again Capra at his best. That metaphor of that's what we do in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
All of us do that, and we don't even know it.
Let's turn to another Jimmy Stewart film. And this is the Shop Around the Corner. This is actually a film most people watching this have probably never, well, they've heard of it in a certain incarnation, but not this version, right? So they may have seen its
Yeah,
remake, You've Got Mail with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan.
right.
They may not even know that film was actually based on a prior film, this one starring Jimmy Stewart from 1940.
And the movie's
Um,
based on a play. It's actually
yeah,
based on a not so famous Hungarian play. It's kind of
yeah.
very little known.
In fact,
So,
the film version, the first one, this one takes place in Hungary. They
hmm,
don't reset it back into America as You've Got Mail does. It
right.
actually takes place in Hungary. And so, give me your thoughts about this film. This is one
Uh,
you just recently watched,
I
right?
had never seen it before. There's a pretty well known Broadway musical based on the little shop around the corner. It's called She Loves Me. And I knew that pretty well. I'd seen three different versions of it, but I had never seen this movie. When you and I were prepping for this, I went back and watched it 2 nights ago, and it's just, I get it now. I get it's light and airy and charming and wonderful, and it's perfectly constructed and beautifully acted, and it's 94 minutes long, and it tells
Mhm.
this incredibly beautiful story about two people who are pen pals and they end up working with each other and they don't know that
Mhm.
each other are these dear friend pen pals that they've had, and they've both fallen in love with the pen pals, but they loathe each other when they meet each other working in the store together. And about the last half hour of it, I think last 20 minutes takes place on Christmas Eve, which is it's just perfect with because the movie's just so I can't even describe it, Chris. I it's so light-handed.
It is
It has
very
such a
much.
light-handed touch to it, and
Yeah.
the actors. I mean, Jimmy Stewart. I went and read a couple reviews after I watched the movie, and somebody, the New York Times, I believe, or somebody who was writing for the New York Times, said that Margaret Sullivan is such an honest. Is that it? Margaret Sullivan? Is that who it is? The actress that plays opposite him that she's so honest and wonderful that she makes Jimmy Stewart not do all that stuttering that he does, and he doesn't do the gulping that he does. He just gives this just beautiful, clean performance. And Frank Morgan, who we all know from The Wizard of Oz, who's the wizard, he plays the owner of the shop, and he doesn't do any of his old tricks either. He gives this very beautiful, dignified performance of the shop owner that's kind of lost his way and worried about his business and worried about his wife. And I just found it immensely, because of its simplicity and its cleanness and how clever it is. I just found it incredibly moving at the end.
Yeah, what I like so much about the film, first, there are certain movies I think of as, I describe as luminescent, the look of the film.
Yeah.
You know, we talked last time about Wings of Desire. That's one of those films. It has, I think, this luminescent look to it. And this is one of them. The way he uses black and white, the way there's scenes that involve kind of fog, it's the way the film is shot to begin with that I think also is part of that light touch of the film. And the interesting thing about this film is, in many ways, very different from It's a Wonderful Life. It's Wonderful Life has a lot of emotional intensity, kind of these peaks of emotional intensity, and this film just kind of has a kind of very straightforward, moving through the story. We get to know what's going on and what's happening. We get to see it unfold before us. And I mean this very positively, in a very kind of consistent emotional kind of carry for the audience. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at the two directors. You have Capra, who's just, every one of his films is emotional and powerful and has all these big speeches, and Lubitsch is, and also the writer. I looked it up. It's Samuel Rafelson, who wrote a lot of the Lubitsch films. It's just light and airy. It's like a pastry. It's just it and then at the end, that last few moments when he reveals who he is to her, it's just profoundly moving because of its simplicity. There's no over emoting. It's never sentimental, which also, it's never sentimental. A friend of mine once said, she said the highest compliment she could give somebody was that not that they were sentimental, but that they were filled with sentiment. And that's always stayed in my head for the last 30 years since she told me that. My moment in the film that is so filled with humanity, it's odd. It doesn't involve either of the leads. It's at the very end, and they've hired a new boy, and it's Christmas Eve, and everyone else has gone off to have their assignations or their meetings. And Frank Morgan, the owner of the shop, is all alone, and he asks several people if they want to go to dinner with him, and they all say no. And the only person that's left is the new shop worker that they've just hired, who's this young boy. And there's this beautiful, beautiful scene where he just says, "Oh, how would you feel about a glistening, delicious Christmas goose and schnitzel?" And he describes, and the boy just looks at him and he says, "You're not from here, are you? You're from the country." And the boy goes, yes, sir, I'm from the country." "You must not have a family to go home to for Christmas Eve." "No, I don't, sir." And then he says, "You'll come with me and we'll have the finest feast." I had tears running down my face because it's so full of humanity, that moment. And this man that we don't particularly like when the movie starts, he's kind of brusque and very short-tempered with everybody. And he suddenly he's filled with this humanity. It's almost like when Jimmy Stewart and Margaret O'Sullivan fall in love, that humanity just begins to spread to everybody. It illuminates all of the characters. So that was my moment. I'm so moved by that.
You mentioned earlier that for me, it's the scene where they recognize who each other is.
Yeah.
And to me, it's a moment of grace. You're right, that's not sentimental.
Not at all.
Right? It's this moment of discovery, this moment where things suddenly look different, right?
Yeah.
But I like the way you said it, without sentimentality, right?
Yeah.
Which is, I think, this is a romantic film that's not sentimental, which I don't think we can say very much. I mean, there's such a pattern to what's supposed to be a romantic film, right, or a rom-com as they call it today, that it's so unusual then to see a film like this, which has that, like I said, that strong romantic sense without the sentimentality attached to it.
Yeah, there's almost none in the film at all. Period. Yeah. Everybody usually has and not a smart remark, but some sort of very gentle quip usually. But
Yeah.
there is no sentimentality, and for some reason it doesn't feel gooey and
Yes.
cloying. Not at all. It feels kind of brisk and intelligent and very, very grown up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm so glad when we talked about it, you said you should watch that because I
Yeah.
just loved it. I was, and it does. The whole movie just glows. It has that ethereal, I call it the MGM lens or whatever it is. It just
Yes.
is.
Ethereal. That's a great way to
It's
put it. Yeah.
very ethereal, and yet it's very. They all work really hard. They all work in the
Yeah.
shop. They work. It's a business, and it's just wonderful. I see now why it's such a classic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So let's turn to the movie then that I hadn't seen that you recommended I watch, which is The Bishop's Wife.
yeah,
So after our conversation, I watched this film. I had seen The Preacher's Wife years ago, the remake,
right.
Denzel Washington. I had never seen the original film, Cary Grant and David Niven. So yeah, I mean, this is another one of a film similar to Shop Around the Corner in that there were no big emotional peaks. Kind of like this slow burn of recognition
Mm-hmm.
as David Niven's character begins to see what it is he is at risk of losing, right? What he has cut out of his life. It's such also a great role for David Niven, who we're
Oh
so
yeah.
used to being the kind of suave Englishman,
Mm-hmm.
and here he is, the clergy member, the kind of clergy member, the self-absorbed, not self-absorbed, the clergy member who's so self-focused on one thing, he's missing everything else around him that's going on in his life. And for me, the scene was when Dudley and the wife go to the choir practice,
Mm-hmm.
and they say to the David Niven's character, "Don't worry, you don't have to come." Right? They let him off the hook in a way to continue with his kind of self-centered kind of work. But that's the moment it seemed to me he begins to realize what it is he's losing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When he begins to get jealous, actually, of that his wife might be actually have affection for Dudley. But to me, that was the scene where, for me, it's the viewer, I think, reflects back on it and says, what is it that I'm so self-focused on
Yeah.
that I'm missing out on the relationships around me, or I'm letting those relationships wither by my own actions, right? By my own self-centeredness.
Right. It's very interesting because the film's structured very much like Mary Poppins. That this kind of supernatural creature shows up, and you realize. I mean, it's the famous thing from the Saving Mr. Banks movie about the making of Mary Poppins, when Disney realized, oh, it's the dad's story. It's not about the kids. It's not about the mom. It's the dad, and that's what's so clever about the Bishop's Wife is that we're led to believe from the title that it's going to be about Loretta Young and
Mhm.
the Bishop's Wife, and it's not. It's about David Niven, and the the moment in the movie, I guess, sometimes it's like in songs and musicals. Sometimes you write songs about two people who hate each other, and that shows you that they actually love each other. There's something similar near the end. You saw it more recently than I did. I don't think I've seen it in about a year or so. And for anybody who's watching this, it's available right now on Amazon Prime.
Yep.
So I actually saw it there yesterday. At the end, when the little bit of humanity that comes into Dudley, when because he doesn't he make it so that they don't remember,
Yes, in the end, I
they
don't remember him. Yeah.
they don't remember that he was there, and suddenly you see whatever bit of humanity as opposed to supernatural and angelicness that he has, that he has humanity suddenly because he realizes he what is it the old punchline from the thing about how he got it's the Music Man, how he was a salesman who got his foot caught in the door, and you
Mhm.
see that he actually felt something for her and for that family, and
Mhm.
I always love that moment. It's yeah. Yep.
Our next film was a co-nominee for Best Picture, and
Ooh.
that's Miracle on 34th Street, for which it was Edmund Gwenn who played Santa,
Edmund,
right?
right,
He won the Best Supporting Actor for that year
for
as
playing
well.
Santa Claus.
Yeah, for playing Santa Claus.
Yeah.
So we've both seen this film, but I've seen multiple iterations, but this is the best.
I thought real hard about. I actually had the good fortune 2 years ago to see Miracle on 34th Street on a huge screen at a giant movie palace in Jersey City, where I used to live. And it's that other thing, Chris, and this is hard right now with what we're going through. Most of us can't go to see movies on big screens now, and you realize those films were made to be seen on massive, giant screens, and they're just beautiful. The black, the white, the grays, the framing, everything. It's just extraordinary. And that movie really stuck out in terms of it was really shot on location. I think, right? You probably maybe know. I do believe they shot those scenes at the beginning at the real
Yes,
Macy's.
at the real Macy's parade.
At the real Macy's parade. Yeah.
Yep.
The moment for me that always gets me about the humanity. There's two actually, and once again, it doesn't involve either of the two leads, Maureen O'Hara or John Payne, or Natalie Wood, in, like, to me, what's still my favorite performance of hers, even when she's a child, and she's just fantastic. There's the movie's just studded with moments, and the one we talked about when we were discussing this, about how she says I believe, and then her wish comes true. But the more I thought about it, the moment that always gets me is when, I think, is it Ellen Corby? It might have been. It's somebody, and some woman brings a little girl to talk to Santa Claus, and the woman says, once again, I am such an emotional person today. The woman says, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. She's from Holland. She's a war orphan from Holland." And Santa Claus turns to the little girl and starts speaking to her in Dutch, and it's just, when you see that in a crowded movie theater with 600 people, the weeping and the sniffles could be heard in the entire theater, and the little girl just lights up, and I think she even says something like Sinterklaas, blah 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 blah, and the woman just looks and says, and he says, no, it's okay, it's okay, and there's that moment of just humanity comes in all different kinds of ways, and that's one of them. That moment of just him reaching out to this little girl that's an orphan and has no one, and who doesn't even speak English, and it just, that moment in the movie always just does me in.
No, I would say, upon reflection, when we talked about it, the same scene, right? That scene, that connect. In fact, it's really interesting to watch. Just this morning, my wife and I were watching the news program, and they were talking about how Santa has had to adapt to the pandemic. So you can go see Santa now behind, plexiglass, or you can get online with Santa. I mean, it's all mediated because of the coronavirus. So again, thinking about how we experience movies change, a classic like this from year to year based on our circumstances. In light of seeing that story this morning, that scene stands out. That human contact, between Santa and this little girl, who the woman thinks will not understand what's going on, and his ability to kind of reach across that gap, right, and connect with her. That's the scene. And as I said, really, in light of literally this morning seeing a news program about how Santa's adapting to the coronavirus.
Yeah, right? There's that, that wonderful little moment just another little, to me, it's a moment of grace at the end of the court trial, when the guy jumps, is it the judge or who jumps up and says, "Oh my gosh, I have 5 more minutes to get to the store.
Yes,
my son wanted that football," or whatever it is, and the whole idea, which that movie basically created, I don't want to call it a cliche, I guess an old saying, about Macy's sending someone to Gimbel's. If Macy's doesn't have it, they send, Santa Claus sends somebody to Gimbel's, which used to be a big giant department store right down the street in New York City, and that became like a trope, I guess you would call it. I guess, of one person in a store sending someone to somewhere else out of kindness and in the spirit of Christmas, as you know. So, what's your next one? I'm fascinated. I
just kind of arranged them chronologically. So the next is Christmas, 1954.
White Christmas.
Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye. I thought that's, when we discussed, as I said to you first, it has Danny Kaye. Anything with Danny Kaye in it, I will watch.
Yes.
I love Danny Kaye. He's his presence in a film um, gives it heart just to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it's interesting because this movie, I don't think was as well regarded then as it is now. I think it's much better regarded today than it was when it originally came out.
Right. I think like critically maybe. I
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
some weird memory in the back of my head that this movie was actually the highest grossing movie of the year in
I think it was actually
1954.
in the year it came
Yeah.
out. It was the highest
Yeah.
grossing film. Yep.
But it wasn't very highly regarded as a film
No.
because it's corny, it's sentimental, it's Vera Ellen really can't act. She can sing pretty well, and Rosemary Clooney can't really act, but she sings beautifully. And
Yeah.
there's Bing Crosby, just like, please just let him sing. Just turn the camera on and let him sing.
Yeah.
And but there is such kindness and warmth and wit. I think the movie's very witty. It's a lot wittier when
Oh,
you
very
watch
much
it.
so.
It's a lot wittier than you remember it being when you actually watch it. And you and I, the scene we talked about, which is it's a great. It's also a musical, obviously, and it's to me. I've written a number of musicals, and there's a real art to it. There's a real skill, and the fact they take the song that they sing at the very beginning, which is a little, it's sort of like it's not really a flashback. It's just the story being told in chronological order of the two guys in World War II, and the war's almost over, and it's Christmas Eve, and their general is retiring. He's being sent back, and they all sing this song called "We'll Follow the Old Man," a wonderful old Irving Berlin song, and it's very moving. And then that has a payoff 2 hours later when they do something very special for that same general. In a basically, we have to put on a show to save to save the house, to save the theater, to save they. That's what they do, and and they use that song in the end, and it's moving when they first sing it, and it's also moving at the very end when a room full of his soldiers who haven't seen him in 10 years all stand up and they all sing "We'll Follow the Old Man," and he's this guy is a retired. Dean Jagger's not as old as he looks in the movie. They made him up to look really old, but he's this guy who runs a little resort in Vermont, and he thinks everybody's forgotten him, and he finds out at the end they haven't, and
Yeah.
it's
You
just
know, what I love about White Christmas
wonderful.
is some movies work because they're all in for what they are. Like you said,
Yep.
right? Vera Lynn, not a great actress. Rosemary Clooney, great singer, not great actress. But everyone is all in on this film, right? You
They
can tell. And
yes,
the I will say if Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye don't work, the movie doesn't work, right?
exactly.
If their relationship doesn't work together, then the film doesn't work. I mean, it really
And
is
and
their ability to play off each other
yeah,
is
they
what makes
pick on each other and they fight. And at the beginning, you think that Bing Crosby thinks Danny Kaye's just an idiot, and but then you realize they really are friends, and they they have great chemistry. I mean, so I was reading an article about films yesterday, and somebody said if the two lead characters don't have chemistry, and each of them obviously fall in love with the two women and everything, but it's more like that's the love story. The love story is between those two bickering best friends who become business partners and entertainers, and it's just I love that movie. And we talked the other day about sometimes it's just the whole movie. It's the complete thing. It's the whole package. And
Mhm.
if you buy into it, you just down to the very ending when they open the doors to the barn at the end and it's
Yeah.
snowing and you're just
And the
like and the
ballerinas come
ballerina
out.
and the ballerinas and
That,
everybody's
that
dressed like Claus and Mrs. Claus and yeah.
yeah, that's again. This is an example I was talking about. When that scene at the end when the ballerinas come out, yeah, I think watching that rationally, I think there's no reason there should be ballerinas in this
Exactly.
scene, but it works because it's
Yeah.
White Christmas.
Because it's
Right?
White Christmas. And the other thing that you and I talked about the other day, which makes me laugh every single time, is that Rosemary Clooney gets angry at Bing Crosby and she storms out of this place up in Vermont in the middle of nowhere. And she gets a job in a nightclub at the Carousel Room in New York City. And that's like on a Tuesday morning. And Wednesday night, she goes on with an hour-long show with singers and dancers and choreography and a 20-piece band. And you're just like, I'm buying it because it's White
Yes.
Christmas. And, and
Yes.
and that's it. And you know what? That takes from a filmmaking point of view, that takes craft and it takes intelligence and it takes humor and it takes a sense of, for a lack of a better word, humanity. Because you know what? We buy it. We
Yeah,
just
and
buy it.
I think your point to humor is important here. I don't think it's a movie that takes itself seriously.
No, it doesn't.
I think that's why you buy into it. You're willing to go with it because you know the film itself is not taking itself seriously. It's almost like a wink to the audience. Like we
Yeah. Oh
know
yeah. We
all
know.
of this. We know that if you rationally try to explain this, it sounds silly,
It sounds
right?
utterly silly.
Yeah,
And it also, the other thing the movie gave us, I think this some of them are old songs that were he already wrote, but some were new and written for the film. And it's also a very human thing. That song, when Count Your Blessings,
yeah,
when you're worried and you can't sleep, count your blessings instead
yeah,
of sheep. And it's a really useful bit of advice,
yeah. What's interesting too is how some songs have become associated with the film that are, in all intents and purposes, you look at the lyrics, are not Christmas songs. But
No.
this song you'll find on Christmas albums all the time now.
The song
Um,
Snow, when
yes,
when they're all singing
yep,
about how they're going to go to Vermont and it's going to be beautiful in Christmas time and it's going to be snowing. And they sing that lovely snow song. And Count Your Blessings is another one that you hear at Christmas. And it's one of those movies that it's not even a guilty pleasure. It's just a pleasure, you know.
mhm,
It's just
yeah.
that movie always makes me happy.
The next film is there are many versions of this story, but you and I actually picked the version that oftentimes I think is either less or known and sometimes even less popular among critics, and that is
Yes.
Scrooge, the musical version of A Christmas Carol, starring Albert Finney as Ebenezer Scrooge. I said that the probably best regarded version is the 1951 version with Alistair Sim, which is a wonderful,
It's wonderful.
a
Yeah.
true adaptation actually, because it's got scenes in it that are not in the original story, but they work. They fit the story. So I mean, highly recommend people see the Alistair Sim version. But you and I have a special place for this particular
That's
version.
true. Well, also,
There's no,
Chris, you know what the original title of the Alistair Sim A Christmas
was
Carol was?
Scrooge.
It was
It was
Scrooge.
Scrooge.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was Scrooge. It was
yeah,
also Scrooge. So they're
yeah.
joined forever, sort of.
Yes,
No, we
yes.
both have an affinity for this movie. I saw this movie when I was like, I don't even. Okay, I probably saw it for my birthday when it came out, so I might have just turned 14. Um, but I just love this movie. I was like, well, there's some movies that you see when you're a kid and you never outgrow them. They just, you know, that you see through them, you see that it's thin sometimes, or maybe there's a bad performance or something. But Scrooge is one of the ones that I just can watch it all the time. It's lavish and Albert Finney's fantastic. And the thing that's so wonderful is that they cast somebody who was the age of the young Scrooge, and so he plays himself in all the flashbacks, and then he's got the bang up makeup job.
What scene is it in this film for you?
I just like the whole movie. I mean, what is your feeling? What's your scene that?
Well, my scene is actually connecting it back to you made mention of Bishop's wife, the David Niven's character, what the bishop understands about what he's missing. I think something this movie does really well, maybe better than any other adaptation of it, is the scene where Scrooge gets to see his past life. Right, he
Mm-hmm.
gets to see
Yeah,
the woman he loved and how he let her go, and it's usually done well. And most every other version, it's more a sense of regret that that he let her go.
yeah,
But I think Scrooge, this version, does a really good job of conveying a sense of loss. He's
yes,
lost something he will never have again.
that's right.
And I think what really works is not just in the showing of it, but the song, right? That Albert
Mm-hmm.
Finney
The
sings
song.
this song, "You," right?
Mm-hmm.
You were new to me.
Yes, that's right.
It's the modern Scrooge looking at his past life, and it's that Scrooge, the Scrooge of today, that's singing to her
Right.
and recognizing what it's not. He doesn't just regret what happened; he's experienced actual loss.
Mm-hmm.
I said, a loss that can never return, a loss he can never have back. And that, to me, is that connection, perhaps, to the bishop's wife
Yeah.
of the mistakes that cost relationships that
Right.
may never come your way again.
Exactly. And what we had talked about before was that book ending. She sings a song called "The Woman That He Had Loved,"
Yeah.
She sings a song called Happiness,
Yeah.
and it's a montage sequence, sewn together with this wonderful song about happiness, and I love one of her first lines is happiness is a folly of fools, pity for me one of the fools, and
Hmm.
it just shows you everything you need to know about her, and you see him being happy. They have bows and arrows, right? They do archery and they do fun things and they run, and it's all very specific. It's not just like happiness running through a field. It's very specific things. So it beautifully pays off later on when Scrooge sings "You," and
Hmm.
specifically that one, the lyrics you quoted. You were new to me. You were you. I think he even says at one point, "You were spring. You were
Yes.
all these things," and that sense of loss, and he sees them. They're waltzing right somewhere.
Hmm.
That young
Yes.
Scrooge and his
Yeah.
fiance are waltzing, and then he sings it, and it all just sort of vanishes, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And he's just left all alone.
Yeah.
Old
In fact,
cheesy
I think that's the scene
the
that ends his past experience,
past.
and
It is. It's
he's left in his room in his bed,
right.
crying, right, with
Yes,
tears in his eyes.
exactly. He has tears,
Um,
and that's a wonderful way to make that transition to the Ghost of Christmas Present, because when you look at it from a storytelling point of view, it's like what you do in the past is all there, and you can't ever change it. But now I'm going to show you the present, because every moment that you're in is always the present, and you are in charge of your own decisions, and that's when you see him. I always love. I also do love the Albert Finney version, because when he goes to his nephew's house, they play that game called The Minister's Cat,
yes, Mr.
which
Cat,
my
yes.
friends and we all saw the movie together. All the theater, I was in a bunch of theater friends, and when we saw that movie, we would like get to whenever we had parties or anything, we played The Minister's Cat, because we all love Scrooge so much. So, and you see that he's capable of being happy, and it's also that great thing when the guy keeps giving him more and more nectar.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, the
yeah,
Ghost of Christmas Present, yes.
keeps giving him the goblet, the golden goblet, and that's when he gets happy. And yeah,
Also similar to White Christmas, if you're going to make a musical version of this, probably most famous Christmas story of all, again, everybody has to be in. Everybody has to be all in
yeah,
on this. I think you can watch the Alistair Sim version and not care about the periphery because the focus is usually on Scrooge or on
yeah,
Marley. But in
always.
this one, these big production numbers, everybody's got to be all in. And sometimes I just look at the extras, on the
Mm-hmm.
periphery of these scenes, these dance scenes, these big production numbers, to see if that's this. And this is one of those movies I think that has that sense again. It works. You can pick it if you want, compared to other films of the
Right.
story, but it works because everybody is all in on this film.
Yeah, and
Right?
I mean, and it's the production numbers and the songs are fantastic. Here it's like 50 years
Yeah.
later, and I'm still like, oh, I know that song.
So let's move on to the next film, and that's A Christmas Story,
Right.
which actually has a similar history to It's a Wonderful Life, in that it was a movie that did not do as well as it was hoped it would do in the movie theaters, but found a second life on television, and now has become the kind of perennial holiday classic because of the 24-hour marathons that we have
Right.
every year.
That's a movie that's given us so many images. Daddy's gonna kill Ralphie, and the
Yeah.
little brother hides under the sink. The kid who gets his tongue stuck to the flagpole. You'll put your eye out. I mean,
Yes.
it's one of those movies that every time you see it, you find one more line that you repeat, to friends, or one more incident. Or it took me years to figure out why, when they go to that Christmas parade, why there's characters from The Wizard of Oz. Do you remember that? Do you remember that
Yes, there
moment?
are, and
Yeah.
if you figure it out, please let me know because that
I
was.
think it's because I think it's an MGM movie. I
Hmm.
don't know who released the movie. I've got to look it up, but I remember one year finally going, okay, this is driving me nuts. Why are these characters from The Wizard of Oz? It also has the evil elf that pushes the kid down the ramp, and yeah, and the guy with the weird, is it like a Daniel Boone cap? The
Yes,
one evil kid with the bad
yeah.
teeth and the Daniel Boone cap, and
Scott Farkas.
Scott Farkas. and Fred Geely. Come on, it gave America Fred Geely. You
Yes.
know, and I, what's his name? The dad. Uh, who is that actor? I love him. He
Yes.
was the Night Stalker guy. Um, and Melinda Dillon's the mom, and those kids are fantastic. And you know, and it's just one of those little gems that now everybody knows because they show it for 24 hours. And
Yeah. And you and
yeah,
I, because we know we love movie history as much as we love movies, who would have thought that the guy who directed Porky's
Porky's
would
could,
direct this film?
yeah, and
Right?
it's
This.
yeah, and it's based on the Gene Shepard short
Yep.
story, Gene Shepard short story. He's actually the one narrating the movie, I think.
Yes, he
And
is.
yeah, and it's just you know, if you want to use that dopey phrase, heartwarming, it is. It's just heartwarming. You just it makes you happy, and the dogs stealing the turkey, and the evil dogs, and them having to have Merry Christmas at a Chinese restaurant, and I mean, it's just it's one of those movies like It's a Wonderful Life, that you just see so many times. You feel like they've always been. It's like a part of your family.
Well, something else the film does so well is it captures that for those of us, I would say, like myself, who were lucky enough to grow up in a household that had the material means,
Hmm.
right, for the child to be excited about getting a gift on Christmas Day,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Wanting a certain gift, and maybe even getting that gift. I think the film captures that so well, right?
yeah.
And I would say from that, there are two scenes in this movie in terms of our theme here about talking about kind of what do these movies show us, or how do they invite us into this kind of reflection on what does it mean to be human. There are two scenes for me. One is that scene where Ralphie gets in the fight, right? You know, his brother's afraid, you know, Ralphie's dad's going to kill Ralphie.
Right.
The way the mother, you know, kind of mediates between them by diverting the father, right? When the
Hmm.
father, when she explains that something happened, but then she shoves a newspaper in his face, he's immediately diverted. And there's that wonderful line in the narration, the voiceover that says, "From that point forward, things were different between me and my mom."
Yeah.
That I just love that scene because
Hmm.
that's a moment. That's the adult Ralphie recognizing something special has happened here, something changed in that moment. That you had this sense of we don't get to know the rest of Ralphie's story after this movie, but you sense there was something special between him and his mom
Yeah.
after this movie ends, right? In their relationship with each other. There's that, and then there's the corresponding scene thing at the end when the father says, "Hey, I think you missed a gift. Right?
Hmm.
I think you need to
Yeah.
look over there." And the
Yeah.
mother's a little upset that he bought the rifle. He says, "But I had one." You know, and the excitement in the father when watching Ralphie open the gift,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is the corresponding scene, right, where Ralph there's that connection between Ralphie and the old man as he constantly calls him,
Right.
right? In terms of the old man's human, throughout much of the movie, the old man is in many ways a caricature of Ralphie's memory, right?
Yes.
With
He's
great
some.
lines,
Yeah.
right? The profanity that's floating out somewhere over Lake Michigan, right? That
Yes.
wonderful line.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, my father excelled in profanity the way others excelled in watercolors,
Hmm. Yes.
or something like that. I mean, there's these lines where his memory of his father, in some ways, is a caricature. But this is the moment where I think his father becomes more fully human. I think
Yeah.
in that. I think the thing that's fun about this movie is we have to remember we're watching a memory. We're watching Ralphie remember
Right.
what transpired during this one particular Christmas, and those two scenes to me stand out in this regard. Right?
Well, I think that moment that you described, where the what was it, where the dad misunderstands something, it's the fragile thing. Um, you know, we've all had a moment with a parent who have said something incorrectly, or I know when I first moved to New York, and you know, in New York, what people do is on the weekend they go to the country, meaning they go out of the city. That's what it is. And I remember um, talking to my dad the very first time. He's like, "What did you do last weekend?" I said, "Oh, we went up to the country." And he goes, "Well, what country did you go to?" And I was like, "No, we went out to the somewhere else." And it's those are the moments, specifically like in that film, that they're so real. We all can relate to, and it takes it away from the caricature and makes it something that's That's very, very relatable.
So our next film is more contemporary, actually. It just came out last year, and it's a Netflix film, so people can watch
Yes,
it on Netflix.
exactly.
Hand-drawn animation, wonderfully drawn animation. And I rewatched it last night, actually. Claws from
Claws.
2019. In fact, I realize in some ways, I'll talk a little bit about this later. I think it's in ways a kind of a clever remake of a TV show we're going to discuss in just a few minutes here. I hadn't thought of that until I watched it again last night. So this is actually one you put on the list originally when we talked about it. So
I did. Yeah.
what is? I mean, I enjoyed this film very much as well. What prompted you to place it on the list?
I put it on the list because I didn't know what to expect, and then a friend of mine who's an animation director, I'm working with him on a film, and he said, "Oh, you have to see this. It's really, really wonderful." And so I watched it last year, uh, and first of all, I was struck by the animation. It's very modern and beautiful, and yet it's kind of old fashioned at the same time. And I'm a sucker for stories of either rebirth or somebody is given a second chance or somebody who discovers who they really are. And I like it when we have somebody who's kind of a jerk and then by the end of it they grow and they learn. I love stories like that. And I didn't when it started I kind of didn't I did wasn't expecting it to go in the direction that it did. And I kept thinking, oh well, I guess this guy's gonna not be a jerk at the end and he's gonna turn into Santa Claus or something. And yet when it started developing and he's spoiled, right? He's got a rich father and so I just didn't expect it to go the way it went and how the whole town is unhappy and sad and I I just loved that. It's funny, Chris. I don't know if there was any one thing about it. I loved them that I loved that the guy who made all the toys was kind of mean and cranky and awful, and then he really wasn't. But I loved how they took all the origin stories from all of those things, and there's even a little salute to the Grinch Who Stole Christmas in it at that one point with the flying
The
through the
sled going
air.
down
The sled, yeah, the sled going down, and I, I just by the time I got to the end, I just thought it's a perfect little movie. It's and it doesn't try to be bigger than it is. It doesn't try to say anything more than it does. Um, it's almost like a little wink, at the end to us, like give somebody a second chance, give them another look, give them responsibility. Don't give up on people too quickly. And yeah, I loved it.
I rewatching it last night. What stood out to me this time was they said the whole film works.
Hmm.
What stood
Yeah.
out to me this time was the little Sammy girl, right, who doesn't
Hmm.
speaks a different language. No one can understand her, and you have the relationship that develops between Jesper and her over the course of the film, right, where she becomes like his confidant, right, where
Right.
he talks about his life or whatever. Um, it's similar in a way to maybe this is a nod to Miracle on 34th Street,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That
I
is,
think.
there's a scene where she finally is understood, right? And for me, it was that scene where Jesper and the Klaus, as he's called in the film,
Klaus.
Jesper
Yeah.
and Klaus go up and they deliver the sled. They go all the way up to where she lives, to her own part of the world, her region, her people, really, because the Sami are actually indigenous peoples of Europe.
Yeah.
They go to her people, and they leave her the sled, and they watch behind the hill, right, as she opens the sled and she plays with the sled. Um, that scene, but then later on, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene at the end where Jesper has to return. He returns. It's 12 years later, and Jesper returns back to her, and you see this wonderful scene. There's no dialogue; it's just her and him, and she gives him a hug at the end. Right? I think what this movie does with their relationship, which is not it's a relationship where they can't speak each other's language, but a relationship develops between the two of them. And in part,
Mm-hmm.
that's what informed Jesper's own growth, I think, as a character, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is her and his relationship with him, one that does not rely on their ability to be able to communicate in words with each other.
Right.
So I had forgotten that scene at the end where he goes back to see her 12 years later. And again, I
Yeah.
don't want to give it away why he goes, because it gives away a certain way at the end of the film. Um,
There's also another a little. It feels to me like a little shout out. Another shout out to the Grinch, because the people in that little town, they're almost the exact opposites of the Who's of Whoville. They are
well,
just like carbon reverse image. You know, they're all mean and cranky and awful and hate each other, and it's very very different from from Whoville.
if you're going to tackle this short, wonderful little 30 minutes of storytelling, then you better be able to do it in a way that's interesting and different. And I think Klaus is that. You're right. We're watching it again. I was like, this is Whoville in reverse. This is the Grinch
It is the
story.
Grinch. Yeah.
It's a retelling of the Grinch story, but with Whoville now completely flipped upside down,
Right.
right? And a different kind of dimension to the story.
Right.
And to me, it's like, this works as a retelling of the story because you're not treading over, you're not filling in gaps that don't need to be filled in, which is my problem with these other versions of the Grinch.
Or
I don't need,
the
I don't need the
Polar
Grinch.
Express is like that too.
I
The
don't need the
Polar
Grinch. It's
Express.
the same thing. It's a wonderful book that's too long as a movie because it wants to give us more than what we need to love the story.
Yeah.
Right.
No, Klaus is just like one of those little perfect things. It's just perfect. It's just like somebody handing you a little perfect gift and going
So
here.
we have two TV shows we were going to talk about here:
Okay.
The Grinch and Charlie Brown Christmas. So let's start with the Grinch, since that's what we were talking about relative to Klaus. So like I said first, I think it works. At 30 minutes, it works. You don't need more than what it gives you in terms of the way it tells the story. What is it about this TV special that works for you?
It's you know, it's the same thing. It's the same thing of taking somebody I just like seeing some transformation of how this guy transforms. I love those. It's a Catholic thing. What can I say? It's the word that I am actually looking for keeps floating around in my brain, and I'm touching on all these other ones, but it's redemption. That's it. I love redemption stories, and the Grinch is one of the greatest. I mean, and even the end, his heart grew 100 times bigger, and it's funny, and I love the crazy that he ties the dog to the sled, and it's somebody who's trying to attack and change something that he doesn't like, and then in the end he realizes. I mean, it's a classic case of psychology of transference, and I hate all of that. And then at the end he realizes, no, I actually like all of this. I didn't like it because I never had it, and I don't know what it is, and they just and it's 28 minutes long or something. It's just perfect. And I love Boris Karloff's voice.
Oh, that's the thing. It's like you have Boris Karloff's narration, and then of course the voicing of the Grinch.
Yeah.
Is what makes this work. And the other part of it is, like I said, that scene where his heart grows, and he suddenly just lifts the sled over his head.
Yes,
right? Miraculously lifts the entire sled over his head to kind of symbolize, that sudden change.
Yeah.
That joy, right? That he suddenly experiences that he did not experience before.
Yeah,
Right?
and he's found redemption. That's, I think, in a way, that's what we're all looking for. George Bailey's looking for that in an odd way. I mean, he was redeemed the whole time and he never saw it. And Maureen O'Hara's character in Miracle on 34th Street, she had a horrible divorce and she doesn't like anybody anymore, and yet she's in charge of picking the Santa Claus in the Macy's parade, and and her daughter, who's just shut herself down completely, and at the end, the fact that she can believe in magic and she believes he is Santa Claus, and that's what so many of these stories have in common. A Scrooge is, he's the perfect example, and even cranky old Bing Crosby, in White Christmas, he finally comes around in the end, and that's what all these stories are about.
We talked also about the look of these films, and with The Grinch, also it's Chuck Jones animation,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Chuck Jones, one of the great animators, became first known for the Warner Brothers cartoons, doing Bugs Bunny and others,
Right.
and it was his studio that produced the animation for this film. And again, that to me is part of why this film works
Yeah.
the way it does, and just again, it just cannot be replicated by trying to do it in a live action, or
Right.
even a computer animated. The
No,
flatness of it is what works also, right? The
yeah.
flatness of the animation
Well,
is
because
why this film works.
you can also get away with all the like the Tex Avery esque things, people being conked on the head and people getting stuck in chimneys. You can do that with that kind of animation. You're not worried about, oh my God, is that actor getting hurt, or how are they going to get him? And then you're all you're concerned about, if you're seeing it as a play or a long, long, long Jim Carrey movie that seemed to have been 8 hours long. They they You don't have to worry. It's animation. They can do whatever they want. Apparently, the UN is meeting in the other room here. I'm not quite sure what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I mean, and then I think where you're going to, obviously, is, to me, the most peerless of all of them. And
Yep.
it's, once again, it's another animated film that was made around the same time in the '60s. And I know that you and I both love this, the Charlie Brown Christmas,
Yeah.
a Charlie Brown Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know my favorite part of that is, I love when Linus tells the story, because they figured out, whether it's Mr. Schultz or the people at CBS or whomever it was, figured out that's the heart and soul of that story. That's what it's that's the that's why it exists. That's the beating heart of that story, is when Linus tells, what is it? Is it Matthew, or
It's the shepherds, right?
yeah,
It's the Luke. It's Luke's
Luke. It's
nativity.
Luke's.
Yeah.
It's in Luke's nativity. Behold, I bear tidings of great joy. And he makes his cape into a shepherd's hood, and Snoopy has one too, and they have a little crook, and that's and then in the end, the tree looks like a beautiful tree, because it's all about, you have to believe. It's going back to Natalie Wood again. I believe, and that sad, sad, sad little tree that we all know and love becomes the most beautiful tree any of them have ever seen, and because
That Charlie Brown has faith in
he does,
all throughout the thing. I
which
mean,
is the point of Luke's
yeah.
gospel. I mean, it's about having faith.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's wonderful, and it has that incredible, wonderful '60s jazz score to it, and
Oh yes. Yeah.
and who can and I and after my favorite part, which is the Linus moment. I just love the way those kids all dance.
Mhm. Yes.
That crazy
Yes.
dancing that they do. It just makes that it just and then at the very end, when they all sing, "Hark the Herald Angels Sing,"
Yeah.
and they just sound glorious, and they all move their mouths really funny.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And Snoopy dancing on top of the piano, of Schroeder's
Yeah,
piano,
exactly.
up and
Dancing on
down.
top of the piano. Yeah, it's so from another time. It's like, I think when it was made, I mean, obviously Vietnam was going on. I don't mean to be all history guy, but Vietnam was going on, but it had only been a couple years, and we hadn't had the counterculture really yet, and it's just it almost feels like it. Now it feels like it came in a time capsule or something when you watch it, and it's really rudimentary, and the drawings, and even the jazz stuff is kind of boppy and more '50s than '60s, and it just, right now, it just feels perfect. It feels simple and perfect, and 23 minutes long, or whatever it is.
And 55 years later, it still works.
It still works. Well, yeah, because what it's about faith, and it's about magic, and it's about believing in something, and which is kind of what, in the end, Christmas is all about, I guess, right? We have our little bonus movies, and
Yes.
I went back and watched my bonus movie. I was going to watch yours, and I just kind of ran out of time, but It's still on my list to watch this week. But yeah, I went
So
back
we
and
each, so that people know, we each had a film that we were going to select that maybe the other hadn't seen that we were going to recommend for people to watch, and a film you probably have never heard of or may have not
yes.
have heard of, not have thought of in this particular vein,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, what's the film that you're
Okay, well,
selecting?
I did a little more research since you and I talked, and it's a short. I believe it's a two-reel short, which means it's probably around a half an hour, maybe 24 minutes, 25 minutes. It was made by Warner Brothers, and it's called Star in the Night. I actually took a couple notes down. It was directed by the director, a very well-known director in the 70s, Don Siegel. This was from 1945, right at the end of the war, Christmas, when the war ended. And he later not only directed the Dirty Harry movies, a lot of other movies as well. And the thing I think you'll find interesting about this is total trivia, is that Don Siegel and this film won the Academy Award for Best Two Reel Short Subject Film. And interestingly enough, there was also an award given out for the Best Short Documentary, and Don Siegel won that as well. So Don Siegel, who was like a nobody at Warner Brothers,
Hmm.
he won two Oscars in at that Oscar ceremony in 1946. Um, a Star in the Night is about. It seems to be about some cowboys that are riding across the desert, and they've bought a lot of junk when they went into town, and it's late, and you think that's what it's going to be about, and then all of a sudden they point to a star that's on the horizon, and you realize it's a contemporary movie. It's not set in the past, and and the star is at a sort of motel gas station diner that's in the middle of the desert. There's nothing else nearby, and for the next little bit of time, you basically get told the Nativity Christmas story, but it's taking place in a diner with a shed in 1945, and it's very, very 1940s. It's another one of those movies you either go with it or you don't, and it's about a family pulls up and the wife's pregnant and they need a place to stay that night, and all the people who have rooms at the motel or are trying to eat at the diner all become involved in making this possible. And I I had not seen it in about 20 years, and I went back after you and I spoke about it and watched it. You can watch it on YouTube. It's right there on YouTube. There's a couple different versions. One of them is in Spanish, and then there's one that's in English. And it's all, clearly they filmed it on a backlot somewhere, and it's the only one guy is in it who's pretty kind of well-known 1940s actor. But I just love the movie. I loved it even more when I saw it the other day. I just because if it's so of its period, you know, and and that last very shot, which I don't want to give away what it is, but it's almost like it's like a Christmas advent calendar or something at the very end. And once again, it's about a grumpy. What the movie's really about is about a grumpy guy who runs this place out in the desert, and nobody, so many people arrive, and he doesn't have any room at the inn, and he's cranky, and he's nasty, and he's mean, and by the end, he's not.
Hmm.
And I didn't realize it has so much in, once again, it has so much in common with almost every other film on the list, whether it's Darren, whatever his name is, the cranky dad from A Christmas Story. Nearly everybody in all these stories change. So
That's,
so
it's very similar to my pick.
yeah,
First, the connecting thread is it's another retelling of the Magi
right.
story. It's not a film that has anything Christmassy in it. There are no trees, there are no lights, there's no Santa Claus, there's nothing that you would associate with being a Christmas film. But it is, in essence, or perhaps you might more properly call it an epiphany film.
Mm, yeah.
It is a retelling of the three wise men story. It's the closest that John Ford ever came, I think, to making something we call a Christmas movie. It's the Three Godfathers, or it's called Three Godfathers, and it's actually a later color remake of an earlier film, a silent version of this story that he made.
Hmm.
So now that I live here in Maine, I thought it'd be nice to recommend a film from one of Maine's native sons, the great John Ford. It's
Like
not
great.
considered one of his great films. It's not in the pantheon of the great Ford films, but it's very sentimental. You know, anything about John Ford is he was very gruff, even sometimes very mean on the set to his actors, but his films are often filled with a great deal of sentimentality.
Yeah.
Sentiment and sentimentality. This is, I would call, a very sentimental film. And it's about three outlaws who are on the run, who come across a woman and her baby in a wagon that has been left out in the middle of nowhere. They don't know what's happened to the husband. Or the woman's pregnant when they find her, and she gives birth, and she designates each of them the baby's godfathers.
Right.
And she dies, and it becomes their task to deliver the baby to the town of New Jerusalem.
Okay.
It's one of Ford's John Wayne westerns, so John Wayne is in it. Harry Carey Jr., who also is a regular Ford actor, and Pedro Armendariz, the well-known Mexican actor, plays the third outlaw, or the third magi, if you will, in this film. And it's really just a chronicle of their journey to get to New Jerusalem. And there are scenes in the film that I think are very moving. One scene that I think Ford always got the best out of John Wayne as an actor. And this is another case of that, where at a scene, in a moment of desperation, John Wayne's character comes across a Bible, and he just happens to open it randomly. And this is what, as someone who's training as a biblical scholarship, is interested in the way the Bible is used in popular media like film. The psalm that he opens it up to, I think, is Psalm 137, which is a psalm of exile. There by the waters of Babylon, you are in exile. And it's this magi character in desperation on his way to safely deliver this child to this town, who, in a moment of desperation, randomly opens the Bible to this passage of being in exile. But the whole point of the desperation of exile is the promise of some kind of redemption on the other end. And I think that in some ways Ford is subtly hinting at, right, is these characters, like everything we've talked about in this conversation. Particularly Wayne's character undergoes this transformation from this hardened outlaw on the run to this caretaker for this child, right? And that experience of trying to ferry this child through the wilderness, if you will, to this town, he undergoes this transformation, trying to deliver this child to safety. Like I said, it's not, you won't find it ever in the list of the great Ford films, but it's spectacular in its cinematography, as all Ford films are, in its use of color, as all Ford's color films are. So it's just a fun. I put it in the category of the fun John Ford films. You know,
Right.
very, very heartfelt film. Wears its sentimentality on its sleeve, I think, very much so, in ways that some of his better films, like what about the Coal Miners? How Green Was Our Valley?
How Green Was Our Valley?
Right. He does better in that film. It's more artistically done in that film. This is a film like that, where the sentiment is very much on the surface.
Right.
Of the film. Right.
Well, I've got it on my list, so I'm looking forward to watching it. So,
good.
Yeah, I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
Do you know John Huston's film of the Dead?
Yes.
Does that take place on Christmas Eve, or?
I think it does take place on Christmas Eve. It's a wonderful film.
It's a wonderful film, and it was funny while you were when you were talking about the Catholicism and the Magi and all of a sudden I went, oh, the Dead. That was something that we did not think of a couple weeks ago, which is also a wonderful film.
It is, and the power of that film is in how quiet it is.
How quiet it is. Yes, it's like the Bible thing about the whisper. That it's the God comes in the whisper, and that movie is definitely filled with whispers.
Yeah,
and somebody was asking me about you and I talking today, and I said yeah, most of the movies are. I mean, there's fun stuff in almost all of them, but they all have sort of serious underpinnings. Even the Grinch and Charlie Brown have serious underpinnings. It's it's
well, certainly yes. If we can add that to the list, if you can find
absolutely.
The Dead, watch
The
it.
Dead.
It's a quiet film based on the James Joyce short story.
Angelica Houston, and directed by her father John Huston, and it's the last film that he made.
Film.
He died shortly after it was finished. And interestingly enough, all the exteriors, they actually went to Dublin and shot exteriors, I believe, after he died. And the whole movie was shot in well, you know, L.A. It was they had created new studios in the '80s, late '80s, out in Santa Clarita, out near Magic Mountain, and all the interiors of that movie were shot in Santa Clarita, California,
How funny.
standing in for Dublin in 1906. So it's a wonderful. That is a wonderful movie. I just watched it again recently, and yeah, feeds your soul,
Good.
as most of these
Well,
films do.
they do. I think that's another connecting thread between all
Yeah,
these films, right?
yeah, yeah.
There's some way they touch upon what is it that makes us human, right?
Yeah, and
Or
that was your question. You know,
yeah,
what's the humanity in these stories? What is it? What is it that jumps out at us? You know, whereas before it was things that gave us hope, and I in a weird, funny way, I think humanity gives us hope when people
yep,
display their humanity or show us the humanity that exists in the world. I think that gives us hope, even in a dark time like this one that we are experiencing. And yeah. So there, Chris. Merry Christmas.
well,